Welcome to hashtag 52 Needs, and this week we're exploring fairness. And I'm so delighted to have with me Jeanette Jifkins, who is the principal lawyer of North Lakes in Brisbane, Onyx Legal, which is a boutique corporate and commercial business law firm. Jeanette is also the author of the bestseller Your Arse Online, a guide to protecting your online business assets. I love that. That's such a great word. Assets, and sought after presenter and educator for national conferences on topics concerning the legal risks of businesses online. Jeanette loves what she does and is passionate about identifying the practical legal solutions that fit the individual business and writing simple contracts that make sense in each business and to its customers. Outside work, Jeanette loves to spend time on their farm with her husband, enjoys swimming, and teaches jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
Woohoo! Welcome, Jeanette.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, so we are exploring fairness, and we're specifically right now we're exploring fairness in life, and then we've got the other recording on fairness at work. So you're a lawyer, so I'm interested. People often use those words interchangeably. Is fairness the same as justice?
Not at all. And in fact, I think justice is even questionable. So there was a quote I read years ago, and I can't remember who the author was, and they said justice is only justice in the eyes of the decision maker. And I think fairness is like that too. When you think, with our kids, and when they're young and they run up, and that's not fair, I didn't do it, it's not fair, all of that sort of thing. Fairness predicates a balance and, the perspective of the person who claims whether something's fair or not. So it's all individually based. And I think when you talk about fairness in a broader concept, you've got to have a better understanding of who the people are involved and what their expectations are before you can make any real assessment of it. Because everybody is going to approach fairness from their own perspective and their own biases and their own experiences. And so what I might think is fair, someone else may not. And in the way in which we make decisions at law, it has nothing to do with fairness or justice. In fact, what it has to do with is what's written in the texts and what decisions have been made in the past by judges. And the decisions made in the past are also influenced by what's written in the texts. And what's written in our legislation is written by lay people. It's not written by lawyers. Legislation writers come from a variety of backgrounds, and most of them have been in that role for donkeys of years. And they, it's a particular mindset, but it's a very long way from real life for most people. So what might be considered fair in a, free-flowing work environment or a schoolyard or any sort of collaborative environment isn't necessarily going to ever end up in legislation unless it's within the context and experience of the writers. And even then, probably not, because then they get together and go, oh, no, we can't write that.
So what we say, justice is blind?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, when we're talking, when you were talking about this, I thought, okay, so we've got justice and fairness. So justice would be if I go over the speed limit and the policeman gave me a ticket. But fairness would be to say, okay, you're on your way to, the hospital and you're in a hurry. And so therefore, I'm just going to let that one slide because you've got a really good reason.
Well, I still don't think it's justice. I think it might be application of the law. I've got a fabulous example of that where I think fairness comes in, which was my husband got done for speeding on a motorcycle, and the person who picked him up was a policeman who normally rides a motorcycle, but he got in to his shift late that day, and so he dipped out. He didn't get the motorbike, someone else took it. And he just said to my husband, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down your speed as this because you won't lose your license.
Okay.
And I've just checked your registration and it expires today. Or it expired yesterday, something like that. It was very, very close.
Mm.
And he said, okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm not going to file this paperwork until tomorrow. So do whatever you can do to pay your registration tonight, and then you'll only get the speeding fine tomorrow and you won't get any other penalties. I think, you know, it's all contextual. It's the people in the environment, and you've got someone who understands what it's like to be on a motorbike and the sense of freedom and all of that sort of thing. And the fact that the road was empty at the time, so no one's at risk. He wasn't being a hooligan. He just happened to be going faster than the speed limit on an exit off the freeway. So there's a lot of sort of mutual understanding there, which created a situation which was far more favourable to my husband than it might otherwise have been if it had been someone who strictly applied what the written law says. And I think that's probably, leaving aside what justice is supposed to be, in terms of fairness, I think that's probably closer to a sense of fairness than anything else, because it's people trying to work from a shared perspective or a common perspective.
Yeah. What I find so interesting is that a lot of the stuff that we used to do person by face to face, person with person, like having the personal connections, that's for a lot of fairness. But these days it goes through a computer system that you can't fight. I mean, I'm a fairly level-headed person, but I have literally screamed at a bank system because it kept putting me around in the same loop over and over again, no matter what buttons I pushed. And so asking for, can we, I don't know, like if somebody needed to ask for a delayed payment or, whatever it might be, is not possible anymore because it all goes through computers and everything has an algorithm. And if you push something, then it goes somewhere else and it goes from there to there. And so there is absolutely no wiggle room whatsoever. And so, I mean, do people have I'm just wondering, do we have an increased sense of injustice because of that, or unfairness rather? Let's put it that way. Not injustice, but unfairness.
Well, I think it's really interesting you say that, because if you think about Taylor Swift, the words to her song, she was talking about something on social media and she says, you say it face to face, that's a burn, but you say it in a tweet and that, essentially a cop out, because there is none of that accountability.
Yeah.
So I think possibly the human interaction and forced need to see the impact of what you do in front of you is likely to produce a fairer result and a more balanced response than when you can hide behind a computer screen, because there's too much anonymity and there's no, writing down words in an angry state of being without and doing it with that sense of immediacy and everything, without any thought for the consequences and without any immediate feedback to deliver those consequences, I think is certainly influencing our society to be angrier and less tolerant and more judgmental and all of those sorts of things. And I do think that the minute you get to deal with someone face to face, or even, the human voice, like you were saying, the other end of the phone, someone who actually listens and has this, is a real person, has a sense of compassion about them, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, but we don't have that. And I know that now people get really, like they say, do you have a personal connection to someone? Could you call them? Could you, be my advocate? And people get angry when there is, when somebody says, yes, I have, but I can't. But that's not fair. You've got the connection. Couldn't you make this work for me? So, I'm getting into this whole, like fairness is all about treating people equally, right? And when there's inequality. So if I have connections to somebody and I make use of them, then that's not fair, but it could also be perceived as fair. So as you just said, it's always
perception.
It's always perception, right?
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's like people who say, oh, it's not fair that they received such and such, you know, they got a grant, or they, you know, got off on a speeding fine, or they did something, and that's not fair. That wouldn't happen for me. Well, sometimes we can perpetuate our own situations, and our attitudes can give us, you know, the kind of reaction we may not have wanted, but we've pushed that. I know that I said something, I wasn't thinking clearly, and I was trying to do two things at once, and I just said something in an offhand way and upset someone. And I thought, oh, I really need to just focus on doing one thing at a time, because there was no intent to upset them. There wasn't, you know, it was just a miscommunication. And I think that's possibly also the speed of interaction now, and the volume of information and interaction. We're losing some of that ability to, what do they say, think fast and speak slow. And that perhaps if we stopped and had a breath before we responded to anything, that we might avoid some of those situations where people go, well, that's not fair.
Got a whole training on just on listening skills. We're really not doing that particularly well these days anymore. Okay, so fairness, inequality takes me straight back to the next aspect, because we were talking, when you were talking about judges and talking about to people on the phone that we know, or what about unconscious bias? How does that play in fairness? Because that's a big topic these days as well.
Oh, huge. Well, I think the whole thing about unconscious bias is we don't know we have them. So until you go and do some form of assessment, which is fascinating. There's some that Harvard University makes available online. They're very basic, but I tell you what, they really highlight your biases very quickly. And I thought, you know, I thought it was very balanced and measured. There's just things there that I'm not.
Yeah.
And you go, wow, I didn't know that about myself. And it's until we have that awareness, then yes, the unconscious bias is going to play. And it plays in so many different environments, you know, hiring and firing people, assessing a piece of work even. There've been some studies to show that if you look at something that someone has produced, based on your assessment of that person, you'll think it's higher or lower quality just on what you think of that person. Whereas if you de-identify a whole lot of things, then you can assess it, you know, like pieces of artwork. You can just assess them on how they present without knowing who the artist is. And that can sometimes produce a different result than if you know who the artist is. So I think unconscious biases, I think a lot more work in that area. And we've got, we know Evolve communities who provide education and training in cultural awareness. They've got some fabulous training, and a lot of one of the very simple processes that they can take people through at the beginning is where do you sit on the privilege ladder? And it's a, you know, if this is your background, take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, this sort of thing. And you just realize the size of the gap between people from certain backgrounds and people from other backgrounds. And yes, the color of your skin comes into play, and yes, where you were educated and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, wow, I had no concept of how broad the gap can become. And you know, until we have greater awareness of those sorts of things, there are people who are just going to make assumptions that something's fair and something's not fair. And, you know, I work with a demographic where there are a certain number of, what do they call them? Pale, male and stale. You know, Caucasian men over a certain age who apparently went to 7 different private schools located in New South Wales or Victoria. And there's a very set view of the world in that demographic.
Yeah.
And to them, that's perfectly normal. And anything outside of that normal has problems with it. You know, it might be unfair, or it might be bias, or it might, you know, injustice or whatever. But that's because they have a certain paradigm. And it's a very limited paradigm, and there's a very small demographic of people who fit that paradigm, and everyone else is outside it. But unless you have that awareness, you don't realize, you know, this is it, it's just the normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's I find it really interesting to look at people who say the world is a fair place and simultaneously have a sense of entitlement that they wouldn't recognize, because for them it's the normal.
Yes.
Whereas for other people it's anything but normal. You know,
exactly.
And they would say it's fair because I have worked hard for this, or my family has worked hard for this, or whatever it might be, whatever the reason they give. But it has nothing to do with what's actually the reason. It's that privilege that you've talked about. It's the, you know, the white, was it? What did you call it? Male, stale?
Pale, male and stale.
Yeah.
And I mean, that in itself, that's unfair.
Yeah.
Because there are some admirable people,
absolutely,
who may otherwise be lumped into that demographic, who are very open-minded and, you know, all of those sorts of things. So it is, any labels that we put or how we generically identify groups creates a level of unfairness anyway.
Yeah. Well, I find the people who identify as entitled and privileged, who say, I know that, you know, I'm a very well educated white woman, you know, I've got my own property, you know, I live a very good life, and I'm very aware of how privileged I am.
Yes.
You know, so, but I've also got male friends who are very aware of the privilege they have, simply just because they're men. But just before, I mean, we can talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to ask you is, and discuss with you, is social media. Supposedly we are now much more integrated, and social media opens us up to all sorts of new, you know, new strata, let's call them that, in society, new areas that we possibly wouldn't have been exposed to. My sense is that social media can actually increase injustice or unfairness because of the algorithms that we're exposed to, because we're getting more and more of the stuff that actually supports our opinion, and that can increase the gap even more. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So I haven't done any research or anything into this area, but from what I have seen, you're absolutely right. We are fed information that just supports our natural biases. So instead of broadening the scope of how we see the world or what we think about the world, it's confirming the boundaries that we're placing on the world. Yeah. And as a result, we are creating these little enclaves of, this is my understanding of the world, and if you're outside that understanding, there's something wrong with you. And that creates separation instead of collectiveness and collaboration and all of that sort of thing. So I don't use social media a huge amount. I mean, I do have regular posts and things for work and that kind of thing, but it's not a media that I get lost in. And I only have limited accounts. I don't use every different, you know, I've never used Instagram. I've never used TikTok. I did use Twitter, but I gave up on Twitter years ago. You know, I try and keep it very confined, and I try not to spend time on it, because there is so much information out there. And if you start looking in areas of interest, so if I look at one of the areas of interest that I have is growing food and agribusiness and that kind of thing. So once you start delving in your own local area, where you've got a local network of producers who understand the environment, what grows there, and all of those sorts of things, then you're actually expanding your knowledge, and you're expanding your perspective, and you're meeting new people. and you're challenging your boundaries simply because it's a topic you don't know everything about, and there are a whole bunch of people you can learn from. And it's not, yes, there's a way to connect on social media, but the learning happens off social media. And I think if people use social media as a point to be able to make connection easier and information, you know, in terms of these events coming up and this is happening and that kind of thing, and research easier, that's fine. But get out there and be with people.
Don't just confirm your unconscious bias.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I know we're running a little bit longer than normally, but there's one thing that I just wanted to, it's the keeping score.
Yeah.
I know that in relationships, there's always this keeping score, this whole thing about fairness. So I have to give something. When I give something, then I have to get something back. And, you know, and then if it's, you know, again, it's like I've given you 3 times, but nothing has come back. When does a relationship become unfair because the giving has swung so much that the person literally starts keeping score because they go, okay, I've given so much, now I'm done. Can we actually have fair relationships in that context? I'm looking at marriages, for example, you know, this tit for tat, or in a good way, you know?
Yeah, I do. I think John DeMartini said something I found profoundly impactful, and that was, you can either be right or you can be happy. And I thought, okay, so it depends what you hang on to and what your priorities are. So if keeping score is something important to you, then I think the question is why, and what's the alternative? We talk about being grateful, and I am incredibly fortunate. I adore my husband, and he looks after me terribly well. He is semi-retired, so he's working from home, and he looks after our property and all of that sort of thing, and we're growing things. And he loves to cook, so he does most of the cooking.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious of the fact that he does most of the cooking, and I'm incredibly grateful he does, because I'm not a great cook. But I will look for opportunities to show him my appreciation in some way.
Yeah.
But we have conversations where it's, you know, I did such and such, and that's not fair. You haven't done such and such. And I think it's a matter of really understanding what the underlying needs or feelings are behind that. It's less about keeping score and more about whether your partner actually feels appreciated as your partner. And focus on that, and focus on being grateful that you've got someone who loves and adores you and is willing to hang around when you want to be crazy. And
maybe accepts that maybe there's a time and period where one person gives simply more because the other person needs more. And then it comes and it swings around. And it's the other way. It doesn't have to be, you know, but I have seen couples, they go, but I have done this for you this week and you haven't done this for me. And it's like,
I had a housemate who was like that, and it was just weird. It's like, did you not understand that the giving of something or the doing of something for someone is supposed to be one way? You know, it's being generous means doing something for someone without expectation. And we had some interesting discussions about that was not right and not fair and all the rest. It's like, well, you actually are doing this for them because you want their company. So they're giving you the benefit of their company. Don't you count that? Oh, no. I invited them to dinner with my family. Why haven't they invited me to dinner with their family? It's like, well, maybe they're embarrassed by their family. I don't care. That's not them. It's like, well, you know, I think some people have very limited views of the world, unfortunately. And look, I was lucky in that my husband and I, when we first met, we did a lot of personal development work together to try and grow together and to improve our relationship. And we've been together over 20 years now and still incredibly happy. Yes. But, you know, that was something that was of interest to both of us, was making this relationship work. So, yeah, I guess it depends on people's priorities.
Well, summarizing, I would say, and you've said this before, it's all contextual. It depends on the people involved, and it's always a discussion. It's finding out what one person considers to be fair and the other one doesn't, or, you know, it's really just talking about it.
And the preparedness to see something from another person's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got to be open to a new perspective.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just, it's different, and it's about understanding other people. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Jeanette, and thanks everybody for watching and listening. And we'll see you for the other aspect of fairness in the other video. Thank you so much.
Thank you.